This video will cover the cardiovascular system, where the need to know structures are the heart, the arteries, veins, the capillaries, and blood itself. You'll need to be able to give named examples of blood vessels, as well as being able to name the chambers and the valves of the heart. We'll also take a look at the key function of the cardiovascular system, which is to transport nutrients, waste, etc. around the body. And we'll also take a look at the structure and function of blood of different vessels such as arteries and veins. So the heart is the main organ of the cardiovascular system. It's responsible for pumping that blood around the entire body, and it consists of 4 chambers and 4 valves. If we look at the diagram of the heart, one of the first things to note is the right and left hand side are reversed. So it will not line up with the right and left hand. Looking at the chambers of the heart, we have 2 on the top, the atria, and 2 on the bottom, which are the ventricles, and there's right and left versions of each. Moving on to the valves, if we start on the right hand side of the heart, we have the tricuspid valve. It separates the right atria from the right ventricle. Pulmonary valve, separating the right ventricle from the pulmonary artery, which supplies the lungs. Over on the left hand side, we have the bicuspid, also known as the mitral valve. It separates the left atria from the left ventricle. And finally, we have the aortic valve, separating the left ventricle from the aorta, blood vessel which takes blood out of the heart and delivers it to the rest of the body. So let's put that all together. We can see our 4 chambers and our 4 valves, and this is all to ensure that blood only moves through the heart in one direction. So let's look now at that blood flow. So blood will come from all over the body into the heart via the vena cava. So the vena cava will bring that blood into the right atria. Once blood has filled the right atria, it can then pass through the tricuspid valve into the right ventricle. Because this blood has come from the body tissue, that means it will be lacking in oxygen. So the next stage of the journey will be to travel to the lungs to pick up a fresh supply of oxygen in order to supply the body tissue. So blood will leave the right ventricle, enter into the pulmonary artery through the pulmonary valve, and from there it will travel to the lungs where it can get some fresh oxygen. Once the blood has picked up that oxygen from the lungs, it then has to return to the heart in order to be distributed around the body. So the blood will leave the lungs and enter into the heart through the pulmonary veins into the left atrium. Blood can then pass through the bicuspid valve into the left ventricle. So the left ventricle has the largest and thickest of all the walls of the chambers, and this is because it has to pump the blood under really high pressure in order for it to reach all of the body's tissues. So when the left ventricle is full, it will contract, push blood through the aortic valve and into the aorta, which is the blood vessel that takes blood out of the heart and to the rest of the body. So our valves are there to ensure this blood flow only continues in the direction we have described. So the atrioventricular valves, the ones between the 2 chambers, they will prevent backflow of the blood from the ventricles back into the atria when the ventricles are contracting. And our 2 semilunar valves, the ones between the chambers and the blood vessels, again, they're there to make sure that once blood has entered in the vessels, keep moving forwards and do not return into the chambers. Now that we've looked at what's happening in the heart, we now need to look at what is happening in the rest of the cardiovascular system. So we have arteries. We've already met the aorta, the largest artery on the human body. But regardless of which type, all arteries will carry blood away from the heart. In most cases, the blood they'll be carrying will contain oxygen, with the major exception being another vessel we've already met, the pulmonary artery, as this is taking blood away from the heart and towards the lungs where it will pick up that oxygen. So all arteries have strong, thick, muscular walls, and this is because the blood has to be able to travel over long distances and therefore must be pumped at really high pressures. We also have veins. Again, we've already met one in form of the vena cava. But veins are there to carry blood towards the heart. Most of them will be carrying deoxygenated blood, blood that lacks in oxygen. Again, our exception will be the pulmonary vein, as this has just picked up a fresh supply of oxygen from the lungs, but is bringing it towards the heart. They're wider than arteries and their walls are thinner, and they also contain valves, as now the blood is moving under a low pressure and we need to prevent that backflow. We have to keep that blood moving in the correct direction. The third and final type are the capillaries. These are the smallest and thinnest of all of the blood vessels, and that's because they're in direct contact with the body's tissues. This is where exchange of nutrients and waste is going to take place. As well as the blood vessels we've already noted, there are some other examples you must be able to name. So we've already seen the pulmonary artery and vein that supply the lungs. We also need to know about the carotid artery and the jugular vein. These maintain the blood flow to the brain. We have the radial artery and vein of the arm. And we also have the femoral artery and vein of the leg. Other vessels that we've already met are the aorta, the body's largest artery, and the vena cava, which is the largest of the veins. We also need to know about blood itself. So all of these key substances that must be transported around the body are going to travel within the blood. So this could be the oxygen, which is there to supply energy to all of the body's tissues, or it could be the waste product, carbon dioxide. Might also be other nutrients such as the blood sugar glucose, minerals, vitamins, and hormones. We look at the components of blood, it is mostly made up of liquid. So plasma is a liquid component of blood, but you'll also find some solids suspended within this plasma. The majority of those solids are your red blood cells, which are the cells that carry the oxygen. In there, you'll also find some white blood cells. These are part of the immune system and help to fight off infections. And also some platelets, other types of blood cells that are there to help your blood clot whenever there's an injury or damage to the blood vessels. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them below in the comment section.